Thank you for praying. Would you take your pew Bible, please, and turn to Psalm 89. The reading is on page 926. We're going to conclude our search for Christ in the Psalms, the songs of the faith of the nation of Israel, and we're going to see that Jesus was promised and predicted in the Psalms, and that those promises were fulfilled in the New Testament in the account of the life of Christ. Psalm 89, verses 1 to 4. I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. With my mouth I will make your faithfulness known through all generations. I will declare that your love stands firm forever, that you have established your faithfulness in heaven itself. You said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all generations. The heavens praise your wonders, Lord, your faithfulness too in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies above can compare with the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, God is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him. Who is like you, Lord God Almighty? You, Lord, are mighty, and your faithfulness surrounds you. Rest secure in the faithfulness of God. We want to see this morning that God's love is eternally expressed in Jesus Christ. Before we get there, though, I want to take a moment for you to picture the usual Christmas scene, the family gathered around the tree and opening the presents and enjoying each other, and focus for a moment on the husband and wife opening their gifts to one another. Because this is one of those moments in life where something funny is about to happen. The husband pointed to a gill-wrapped package and said to his wife, "Open that one next." The wife picked up the gift and unwrapped it, opening it to find one of those obnoxious singing and dancing Christmas trees. She is a bit shocked, remembering how just days ago she had pointed out how much she hated those things when she and her husband were shopping together. Holding it at arm's length, she said, "Weren't you listening when I said I thought these were the most annoying things ever?" "Open the other gift," the husband said, pointing to a package that is even more poorly wrapped and is very heavy. His wife set down the robotic Christmas tree as if it were radioactive. She opened the second package to find a sledgehammer. "Is this for what I think it's for?" she said. The husband replied, "And you thought I wasn't paying attention." We spend a lot of time and pin a lot of hopes on trying to both please and surprise people at Christmas, don't we? One person wrote about how her dad got her mom her favorite DVD as a present, and that would have been very thoughtful except for two things. One, the DVD was a rental, and two, they didn't own a DVD player. So when gifting fails or real calamities come, one question that springs to mind is why? And we ask, why did God allow this to happen. The worst calamity ever to befall the people of God in the Old Testament times was to be taken over and taken captive by the Babylonians. And this psalm, number 89, is one of many examples of songs lamenting this terrible circumstance. And we've noticed that the writer of these psalms is not shy about expressing his questions and even at some points accusing God of neglecting or forgetting about his people. They pleaded for an end to their suffering and leaned on his promises to encourage their hope. We're going to notice two things in the passage today. The first is the promise of forever love is bound up in the dynasty of David. This is an Old Testament fact. The second thing we'll notice is that the fulfillment of forever love is bound up in the person of Jesus Christ. This is a New Testament fact. In verses 1 and 2 of Psalm 89, we noticed that God is worshipped for his love and his faithfulness. Those two words came up very frequently in the portion we read, and in fact occur 7 times in the 52 verses of this psalm. The writer encourages us by telling us that eternity is bound up in these promises. It is the song that never ends. Have you ever heard that from Lamb Chop? This is the song that doesn't end. It just goes on and on, my friend. Some people started singing it, not knowing what it was, but they'll continue singing it forever just because it is the song that doesn't end. Okay. You know, and after about 5 minutes of Lamb Chop singing that, you're ready for some Lamb Chop. Take that little sock puppet, cut him up. But this is a good kind of song that doesn't end. It goes on into eternity and exists on a firm and trustworthy footing. Forever is an indefinite length of time in the original language. And in Romans, Paul wrote that God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. They go on and on. They continue. The thing we can focus on here, friends, and the promise that we can claim for ourselves is that all of this is very reliable. God is not going to change his mind and withdraw his love. God is not going to change his mind and suddenly become unfaithful. He's not going to change his mind tomorrow morning and say, you know that sunup thing? Don't count on it. It's sure, it's certain, it's reliable. In fact, the psalm writer says that these things have been established in heaven itself, in the eternal place. And the idea here in the original language is that this is a record that the psalm writer is putting together to testify to the next generation. In fact, he specifically says, through all generations. Now, what's our response to this fact? Our response is to praise God. And the psalmist says that he's going to sing, that he's going to declare. And those are the two ways that we commonly give praise to God, isn't it? We've been doing it this morning. We've been singing and we've been declaring the praise of God. And when he says with my mouth, that's not just being obvious. It means that I'm going to do this loudly. I'm going to make it clear why I'm praising God. And this reminds us that the joy of being in God is supposed to be something we just can't contain. You know, those moments when you're waiting for something to happen. Maybe you're waiting for somebody to open a gift that you know is going to surprise them in a nice way. Or it's going to be a delight to them. And you're just on the edge and you're waiting and that laughter comes out. It's a beautiful, wonderful moment. And life is to be like that as we live in the Lord. And the rest of this psalm is all about that. Verses 5 to 13 are God's power over creation. Verses 14 to 18 celebrate God's moral power. Verses 19 to 29 testify that God's Son is going to be imbued with that power. Verses 30 to 45 testify that God's wrath against sin is mitigated by his covenant love and his faithfulness to keep his part of the deal. And verses 46 to 52 is worship that includes pleading with God for mercy. Then we turn to the second two verses that we're going to look at this morning, verses 3 and 4. And they explain one aspect of God's love and faithfulness, and that is his eternal covenant with the house of David, establishing the dynasty of David forever. And it's repeated again in verses 26 to 29 in case we miss it here. King David is referred to as the Lord's chosen one and his servant. The title chosen one reminds us of how God works in all of our lives, whether we're a king or a pauper or something in between. God chooses us first. God loved us first. God reached out to us first and claims us as his own. Then we work with him and cooperate with his will. The calling of God never rests on our qualifications, but on God's choosing and his empowerment. The title servant here refers to David doing his part of the covenant relationship, of being obedient to do God's will. The covenant that God swore with David was to establish an eternal dynasty. He had promised David that one of his descendants would reign forever. The fulfillment of this promise is realized in Jesus Christ, who, as we will see, is a member of David's royal family by birth, but also by means of his victory over the grave. He will live forever and reign forever. And you see, God accomplished this by bringing together humanity and divinity in one. We are to feel secure in this promise. The psalmist said in verse 2 that it stands firm, and in verse 4 that it is established. The fulfillment of the forever love of God is found in the Son of David, Jesus Christ. If you were to turn to Matthew's Gospel, the first chapter, you would see a list of names. This is Jesus' family tree, and it is there to prove in Matthew's Gospel that Joseph is in the line of David, an ancestor of David. But notice that in Matthew's Gospel, the family tree only goes back as far as Abraham. That's because Matthew's purpose is to show that Jesus is related to all of the Jews, all of the Old Testament version of God's people. But then we turn in Luke's Gospel, and we see that there's another genealogy there. There's another family tree presented, and it also serves the purpose of showing the relationship between Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, and the line of David. But Luke's version goes all the way back to Adam, the first human being. And Luke's purpose is to show that Jesus is related to all people. All who will receive him will become children of God. The love of God the Father for Jesus, God the Son, is expressed 3 times in the New Testament. We're just going to note these. The first is at Jesus' baptism. Jesus' baptism at the hands of John the Baptist. In Matthew 3, Mark 1, and Luke 3, there is a voice from heaven that says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." These words were repeated by the voice from heaven at Jesus' transfiguration as well. At Jesus' transfiguration on the mountainside, when his countenance glowed with heavenly glory. In Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9, these same words are said, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." But here, three words are added. Listen to him. Listen to him. And then finally, in John chapter 12, verses 20 to 50, Jesus encountered some Greeks, some people from Greece, and they asked him about eternal life, and he taught them, and he prayed with them. And after he prayed, there was a voice from heaven that said, Jesus prayed, "Father, glorify your name." And then the voice said, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." Here's why that's important. Jesus explained to them that the voice spoke so that they would realize that his imminent death would provide salvation for all people, including the people to whom he was speaking. We're seeing this morning, friends, that God's love is eternally expressed in Jesus Christ. In an article entitled, "Keep Close to the Heart of Christmas," Bible teacher and pastor John Piper puts the day in perspective when he writes, "Now, I think this is as close as we get to the actual description of the event of the incarnation, of the divine nature in some way uniting with the human nature in the womb of Mary. We know from various texts in the New Testament that Jesus was God, very God, who had a divine nature. He had a real divine nature. Colossians 2:9 says that in his body there was fullness of deity. Let that sink in. In his body there was fullness of deity. And we know that Jesus Christ also had a human nature. Paul wrote, "For there is one mediator between God and men, the man, Jesus Christ." The man, Jesus Christ, is our mediator. 1 Timothy 2:5. So he was a mediator between God and man because he was a man. So we know that Jesus was a God-man. There were two natures, the divine and the human nature, in this one person, Jesus Christ. On this last Sunday in Advent, with Christmas Eve just hours away, we reach the climax of our struggle to keep Christmas centered on Christ. Too soon, the day will be over, and we'll wonder why we got in such a fuss again this year. We'll vow to do better next year, and possibly fall back into old habits then too. What we've learned is that Jesus Christ is the focus of these days. In both Old and New Testament, it is affirmed that he gives us all we need to be saved, if we will only receive it as a gift. Be one of those people who receives at Christmas and every day the whole year long. Have a blessed Christmas. Let's celebrate the love of God by turning in our songbooks to 259. Sharon is coming to lead us in this hymn close.